Hey, unsupervised learning listeners. Normally, I don't record anything that is super time sensitive, but this is a podcast I recorded with Richard Hanania about the events around January 6th and what's going on in the United States right now, the potential for civil war. I recorded it and I'm posting it as soon as possible. So if it feels a little different than the other things that you have listened to, that's the reason. It's a really different just orientation to what I'm trying to do here, but I think it's important. So I hope you enjoy this.
This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Hey, everybody, it's Razib. I am here with my friend, Dr. Richard Hanania. Can you introduce yourself, Richard?
Yeah, sure. I am the president and founder of the Center for Study of Partisanship and Ideology. We research social psychology, political science, underexplored topics in the social sciences. I'm also a research fellow at Defense Priorities, where I write about American foreign policy. That's about it now.
So, Richard, I've talked to you before. We know each other online and whatnot. I've talked to you about foreign policy, those sorts of things, the election. And now I want to talk to you about what's going on in the United States right now as we speak in middle of January after January 6th, which I think is a date for most of the listeners in the United States that I don't need to elaborate, but there was some violence that happened on the Capitol, our legislative building for the federal government on January 6th, a crowd of pro-Trump people.
Uh-huh.
And there's a lot going on. Lynn Cheney just came out saying that she's going to, vote to impeach. She's number 3 among the Republicans. So a lot of shift is happening. You wrote an article in the Washington Post. I don't know how many months ago was that article. Was that op-ed in the Washington
I
Post?
remember because it was the Sunday before the election, so it was something like October 31st, November 1st, something like that.
So it was basically throwing cold water on the idea that there could be a civil war, some serious conflict in the United States, which is a it's a model, it's a theory that people were like putting out there a couple of months ago. So now we have violence. Police officer died. Someone was shot in a federal building. Facebook, Twitter kicked Donald Trump off their platforms. There's rumors of violence everywhere. In all the capitals and marches. Has this updated your model in any way? And then also, can you just tell us really quickly? And you did a Blogging Heads TV with Bob Wright, and so I'll put the links in there for the show notes. But where you outlined your theory and told Bob why you do not believe a civil war will happen in this country. So, can you talk about that and any updates since then?
Sure. I can't take credit for what I've been summarizing from the Civil War literature in the Blogging Heads TV and in the Washington Post article. But basically, the idea is, and it's an idea that I'm just taking and sort of applying to modern America, is that the model of civil war that most people are working off of is a grievance-based model. If Americans hate each other, and they do hate each other more than ever, we have a lot of data on that and a lot of sort of anecdotal data supporting that. So that part is true. The idea is that we're getting closer to civil war. We're getting closer to conflict. Now, if you look at actually the Civil War literature, what predicts civil war is basically having a poor country, having some kind of political destabilization, like like decolonization or something like that, some external shock, or also geography that poor states can't reach. It generally does not happen in rich countries. In fact, it's never happened in a country anywhere close to the United States, anywhere close to as wealthy as the United States. Does that mean it can't happen? No, but I mean, all we really have to go on is the past, and technology changes and society changes in response to technology and economics. So you never know. But if you're just going past with the past as a guide, I would say civil war is highly unlikely. Now, um, looking at the circumstances of the United States today and wealthy countries today, and sort of which way has technologically pushed? Has it made civil war more likely or less likely, or other kinds of mass violence? My intuition is to say probably less likely, because you have the internet, you have these channels of communication, you have these epistemological bubbles, and everyone has their own news channel and website and social media. So maybe you say, okay, there's more division. At the same time, the police, the FBI, the NSA, they have these things too. And if you think it's lack of state power that causes civil war, then the state has really never been better positioned to head off threats to it. Um, whether my model has been updated, I'd say no. I mean, I never said that bad things wouldn't happen in the United States. I mean, I think that bad things can happen. This was I would not downplay what happened on last Wednesday. They breached the Capitol. Five people died. Three Trump supporters died of their own health problems. One of them was shot by a Capitol Hill police officer, and one Capitol Hill police officer was beaten to death. It's obviously terrible. There's videos of these people going around chanting, "Where's Mike Pence? Where's Nancy?" I don't think they were looking for them to have a nice conversation with them. So it was a pretty big deal, and a pretty awful thing. Um, but civil war is something else. So civil war is something where, depending on the definition used, usually it's generally 1,000 people die a year in armed conflict, and I don't see that happening. I mean, the worst case scenario. I've updated my priors a little bit, I'd say, on like political instability, whether we can just have a coup. I mean, we could have a coup. A coup is not a civil war, and I think if we did have a coup, it wouldn't end in civil war, because one side would just have the government and that would be it. So it's updated my priors on that a little bit. People say that if there was a smarter Trump, maybe he could have pulled this off. I think that's probably true, but I don't think you can bank on a smarter Trump ever coming along. I think he was sort of a unique character. The sort of connection he had with the Republic, he still has with the Republican base, the sort of way he's mind melded with them, and then combined with his personal traits of just not caring about morality in any way. That's a unique individual, and like you could say, well, take that individual, but make him a little smarter, and maybe things work out differently. Well, you never know if you're going to get that. That could be like a unicorn. So yeah, I think our institution is a little more fragile than I thought. Do I think that we're going to see people killing each other in large numbers in the next few years? No, I still don't believe that.
All right, so civil war for political scientists, you are a political scientist, has a technical definition of 1,000 people being killed in conflict within the country due to
Yeah,
internal conflict.
yeah, exactly. And sometimes there's people will use different definitions, but generally that's the most commonly used definition.
All right, and I guess then by that definition, we've only had the Civil War in the 1860s then, because there were conflicts and instability. But I mean, 1,000 seems a lot.
Yeah, I mean, but you have to have a cutoff. You have to have a cutoff somewhere, right? I mean, it can't be,
Yeah.
if you consider every time there's a mass shooting civil war, then we've had multiple civil wars every year for the last decade. That can't be right too. So it's easy to say, I predict bad things are going to happen, and then bad things happen, and you're right. But you have to sort of discuss each of these things differently, right? Is a civil war likely? Well, there's certain causes of that. Is a coup likely or not? Well, there's different causes of that. So you have to think about sort of these things individually. Bad things will happen is not a prediction. I predict bad things will happen in the next few years too. It's just we have to be specific about what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I am noting is, we're talking about civil war and coup, and I want to ask you about what you mean by coup, but it looks like a lot of the elite right is turning on Trump rather quickly. I mean, they were not totally bought in ever anyways. It was obviously partly just self-interest. But if you look at the front of National Review, it is not feeling very Trump friendly right now. People like Madison Cawthorn are now turning on their previous, flirtation with violence. Lynn Cheney, as I mentioned at the beginning, comes out in favor of impeachment. McConnell, who was never a big Trump fan, is sending signals that he's happy with, an impeachment. Um, I just saw a headline right now. Meghan McCain said some really negative things about the people who rushed. Did you see that?
Not specifically Megan McCain,
Okay.
but I've seen that other stuff.
Well, I mean, she's married to, Ben
Dominic, right?
Domenech, who owns or not own, he founded The Federalist, so which is probably the closest to, mainstream conservative media that's pro MAGA. I mean, not talk radio, not American greatness or whatever. So I think that that's a signal. So Biden is president-elect, he's gonna be president anyway. Would it be a coup if I mean, like, how do you define a coup? Would it be a coup if they impeach Trump and he can never run again. I mean, I don't really know like how we classify that.
Well, no, I mean, I think a coup would be, that, you impeach him. That I mean, that's all legal procedure. Running, having invading the Capitol and sort of physically intimidating them to not certify Biden's vote, I think is something closer to coup. I I don't put much stock in. Sort of the Republicans turning on Trump. I mean, I'll tell you I would still be shocked if they voted to impeach him even after he's gone. The thing is, the it seems like a lot. Liz Cheney is number three in the House among Republicans. And then Madison Cawthorn didn't actually say he'll impeach him, but he said that he regretted going along with the Stop the Steal stuff. And there's Adam Kinzinger and one other congressman, and these aren't surprising. These aren't people who were sort of a hardcore Trumpists before. We haven't really seen that break yet. And I think you have to understand American politics in the context of everything is about polarization. So if you look at the last 10 years, every highly salient, um, pretty much, I think without exception, any highly salient thing that Congress is voting on has always, as far as I can remember, broken down along party lines with maybe, a handful switch between parties. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about Obamacare, where Obama worked really hard to get some Republicans on board. They stayed firm. No Republicans went on board. I'm talking about the attempt to repeal Obamacare, which a few Republicans went with the Democrats on, but it was still I think Collins and it was like Collins and McCain or something. I'm talking about Supreme Court votes, and then the Trump tax cut, then impeachment, the first impeachment itself. So each one of these was almost a perfect party line vote. Why? I mean, there's structural things going on here. The Republicans in particular live in fear of talk radio and they live in fear of being primaried. And I would maybe buy the idea that they would force him out a little more seriously. If you just watch Sean Hannity tonight and you watch Tucker tonight and Lauren and Grimm tonight, I would look what Fox News is doing more than what sort of people on Twitter are doing. I think that's what they live in fear of: talk radio and sort of Fox News. So I think there's a little bit of a break for Trump. So we have at least three Republicans who are going to vote for the impeachment in the House. It was zero. On the Ukraine impeachment, maybe it'll go up a little higher. I'd be very surprised. I'd be very surprised if it went up much higher than that. They're over him. I mean, they have an excuse now in the sense that he'll be gone in a week, so they can just say, this is divisive. The country needs to move on, and they have to vote. And I think they'll probably, there's just it's just a. I mean, they hate the guy. They're really sick of Trump and what he's done to the party. They're still scared to death of their base, and they're still scared to death of being primaried. And if it's like a 50-50 issue within the Republican Party, but the activist base like really loves Trump, I don't think they're going to do it.
So you think I mean, let's get a number from you. Like, so in the House, it's going to be mostly party line. There'll be a few people that break, but once it gets to the Senate, like how many people will vote to convict? I mean, all the Democrats, and then
Yeah, and then Romney, uh, maybe Collins and Murkowski, and then Sass, and that would get you to 54. You need 67, and I think there's a big drop off in probabilities after those four. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else who's the usual suspect. You still got a long way to go to get to 67. Yeah, and I doubt you get there.
yeah, that seems a reasonable assessment. So no civil war. What's your let's say let's give some probabilities. Okay, let's give some probabilities. Civil war in 2020.
I love that. I love this, Radeep. I love that you do this. This is how every political discussion should be, and then we can fairly judge people.
Well, I mean, 2021 hasn't really started yet, but let's prorate it a little. Um, 900 deaths due to internal conflict. That, like, let's call that a civil war in 2021. What's your probability on that, and what's your confidence on the probability?
2021, just this one year. Uh,
Yeah.
oh, close to zero, like
Okay.
point. I mean, point one is one in a
Yeah.
thousand.
High confidence.
Maybe point two with 95 percentiles, maybe
Yeah.
between point one and point four, something like point five, something like that. Point five would be actually pretty high for a civil war, right? That'd be one in 200. Yeah, I think I'm pretty comfortable with that, with the 95th
All right.
percent.
So let's push this to 2028. So it'll be most of the 2020s. What is your probability that there is, over those years? Let's say, like, what is your confidence that none of those years have 1,000 deaths? Civil war.
So I said for the next year about point two. So these aren't independent probabilities. You have more
Yeah.
time, but I don't suspect that. I think Trump is so unique that if it was going to happen, it probably would have happened under Trump. And like I said, there's not a great chance that another Trump will come along. So it doesn't waiting till 2028. I don't think bumps it up that much. Maybe you go from point two to point four or something like that.
Okay. Wow. I mean, that's 1 out of 200 or 1 out of 250. You're saying there's a 1 out of 250 chance that there is a civil war. I'm trying to make it seem like a big deal.
That's not, yeah, that's not, I guess that's not nothing. I mean, I have seen people, I mean, people should put probabilities because you read these articles and they'll say, we're dangerously close. And you don't know if they mean one in a thousand or one in two or one in five, right? I mean, that could mean anything. So yeah, it's good to you put the numbers. I don't know if that's a lot or not, but I generally think when people say civil war is a distinct possibility, I generally think they mean higher probability than 1 in 250. I bet if you went to had a predicted market on this, I bet it would be like 5 cents. Yes. So my estimate is way lower than. I sort of have a feel for this because I play these betting markets, so I have a feel of this. And I think it would be like a 5 to 10% thing on the betting market. So my view is much lower than you could say what the conventional wisdom is.
Well, so I mean, what about a coup? What about a coup between now and 2028? What is your probability on that?
Um, Maybe. I mean, okay. So I guess we have to. I mean, we have an easy definition for civil war, um, and I guess a coup would be some kind of forcible removal. So I think something like that. You just look at it and you say, okay, that's sort of outside the bounds of sort of legal. Now, look, if MAGA marched to Capitol Hill and they just sort of physically intimidated, like just sort of it'd be shame if you don't go along with this, and then they threw out the votes, and then they crowned Trump, president for life or president for the next 4 years. President for life would be an easy case. Is that a coup or not? Well, that's sort of a borderline case. Um, yeah, I think odds are low. So I said by 2028.4 maybe for civil war. Well, there's only like two elections, so like civil war could happen like any time. Well, elections there's only like two elections. So I'd say probably lower than the civil war. And Biden's going to be president for 4 years. I don't expect him to pull off a coup. So maybe probably even lower than the civil war. I thought it was I see it more as a theoretical possibility. You just have to have sort of the right. I'm shocked actually the extent to which the Republican Party has gone along with Trump's nonsense. I mean, it's really a high number. It still holds, and once again, a smarter Trump maybe could pull it off. A smarter Trump would be a very different man, and he may never come along. That just not something you can bank on.
Yeah, I want to come back to some nerdery in a second, but let me ask you about the whole Trump thing because I've had discussions with people about this. A smarter Trump, a more strategic thinker rather than an instinctive tactician. I'm being generous with the way I'm describing him, I think, but let's put it that way. Would have been more effective, right? But in terms of what he wanted to do, but people point out, well, he probably wouldn't have gotten nominated and
Yeah.
won. Like, do you think that's correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of Trump's genius, and this is something I go by feeling. Just I have a lot of friends and family who are working class, who are Trump supporters, elderly, and
Wait,
talking
wait,
to them.
wait. Elderly Trump supporters. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
code? Is that code for white supremacists?
Well, if you consider Arabs white supremacists, yeah, maybe, maybe, yeah. So yeah, they are. And I think that their minds are so melded with his. To me and you, Rizzy, me and you do not watch a lot of cable news, right? I mean,
I don't watch TV.
yeah, well, there you go. I mean, you're more elite than me. I watch some TV, and I try to watch some cable news just to sort of get a sense of where the political culture is. I just think it's necessary to sort of just have a good opinion on these things. Um, and Trump is mind melded with them because he's watching TV all day. Now, even these people that I know probably don't watch as much TV as Trump, but they're watching, a couple hours of Fox News a night, and his brain is sort of going in the same places and thinking about the same things that where his brain is. A smarter Trump wouldn't be able to do that. Smarter Trump like would have to sit there studying like talk radio and studying like Sean Hannity and like seeing how to appeal to them. And human beings have evolved, and I'm sure you know this. If there's one thing they evolved to do is to sort of read other people well. And someone like Josh Hawley comes along, you say, "Oh, maybe that's a smart Trump." It's funny. Somebody wrote in Newsweek, they're like, "Watch out for this guy. This is Trump without the stupidity and the open racism." And I'm like, "That's what made Trump successful. Like
Yeah.
Trump minus the stupidity and open racism is not Trump, and like he's not as successful." So you can tell, like you could that connection is not there. Howley can talk about bringing jobs back from China. He could talk about immigration. He can talk about elites, and he could talk about people are out of touch. And that doesn't give you the connection. It's not simply that. Um, so yeah, Trump is a unique figure, and it might get very boring after him because people are discounting the possibility that it just goes back to normal. There's Biden, there's Kamala, there's Nikki Haley and Ted Cruz coming down the line. Unless it's Trump himself, I don't really see a smart Trump, sort of waiting in the wings.
What about Don Jr.? Do you have? I mean, you watch cable TV. He must be. I think he shows up on there. I mean, what about his instincts? What about his abilities? Do you think regression to the mean?
Yes, regression to the mean as far as connection. Just going off the thing about cults of personality, they seem to pass on, genetically pretty well. The air becomes sort of the shelling point. They have the around which all the sort of like a king who goes off, who goes off after a revolution, and they try to reinstate him because there's sort of a name brand recognition of the monarchy, and just that's where all the monarchists are going to go. So if Don Jr. wants it and Trump, gets behind him, maybe I don't think it's going to be as deep of a connection, but he's plugged into that universe. Um, Trump doesn't seem to like his son as much as he likes Ivanka, and
We don't need to talk about the reasons for this, right?
I mean, come on. I think that would be a pretty natural preference, actually. But yeah, I think she's underrated as part of people who think that Trumpism is about actually owning the libs and like being plugged into talk radio and like talking about girl sports and trans and girl sports. If you think that's what Trump is about, then you think it's Don Jr. If you think it's just a cult of personality and then just about being able to sort of just being there and having Trump's blessing and just sort of going up there and just saying whatever. And then Ivanka would be much more appealing, I think, to normal Republicans and moderates. I think people are sleeping on her as potentially the true heir.
So basically, Ivanka is Jacob, and Don Jr. could be Esau.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, so
Yeah.
we're throwing out some references there. So let me just for the listener. I mean, I think a lot of you guys will know, but basically, a regression to the mean means indicates. Let's say that you have someone with exceptional characteristics. So, for example, in a sports analogy, would be Michael Jordan, arguably one of the two best basketball players in the history of the world. There's an argument whether LeBron James is as good. So let's just say one of the two. So Michael Jordan has several sons, and many of them, I think at least one of them played in college sports, but he wasn't actually that great as a college athlete. But he was still a college basketball player, which is still considerably better than 99.999% of people who play basketball, right? So, he had some talent, but Michael Jordan is exceptional in many ways on many dimensions. And if you have a characteristic genetically, which is not entirely heritable, there's a lot of noise parameters, noisy factors, perhaps development, perhaps environment, perhaps contingency and happenstance. Um, that lead to Michael Jordan being who he, is, like why, exceptional in all these metrics. Well, the genetic part is heritable. It's going to go to his son. So they're tall, they're probably pretty muscular, they're pretty athletic. There's a lot of people like that. But Michael Jordan has a lot of special things, and some of those might just be random and they're not going to transmit to the offspring. right? So you have these cases with exceptional individuals who do not have offspring who are nearly as exceptional, even if the offspring are okay. So Michael Jordan's sons are okay. Like they're much more athletic than the typical person, but they're no Michael Jordan, who's, you know, a, he's one of the best basketball players in the history of the world, right? And so that's what I'm saying is, if Donald Trump has these exceptional tactical, instinctive characteristics of connecting to the MAGA people, this doesn't seem like it's necessarily going to be a very heritable characteristic. It could be due to various things in his life and in his experience combined with his personality. And so that's why I'm saying maybe it's regression to the mean, because Don Jr. on paper is actually a much more MAGA person. He's much more conventionally conservative. Uh, but there's a whole biographical stuff that you can look up about Don Jr. and how his dad doesn't always respect him. And so there's that issue. Can you talk, Richard, what a Schelling point is?
So a Shelling point is just sort of a place where it's a place. How do I explain this? It's been I taught game theory at UCLA, but it's been a while. So a Shelling point is basically somewhere where everyone agrees. So you want to coordinate in some way, right? But you don't know. It's a coordination problem, and that you don't know. So me and Razib say we lost our phones, and we want to meet in New York City. And we're going to be in New York City, but we can't coordinate the exact place. Razib, where would you go?
Uh, where would I go? Empire State Building.
I'd go to Times Square. So close. We'd go somewhere in Manhattan, downtown. We'd go somewhere in Manhattan. But that's the idea. If he would have said Times Square too, you would have said yeah. So a Shelling point is basically somewhere where people can coordinate. It doesn't have. It's sort of like an unconscious process, right? So if you're a monarchist, you usually you gather around the firstborn son of the king, and you try to have a counter revolution. So the idea is that Trump is sort of a cult of personality, and I think with Trump, what he was in 2016 was sort of a Shelling point for everyone who hated PC, and he was just swallowing up so much attention that he was there. And so if MAGA has if MAGA's going to go somewhere, and Trump is whatever he for whatever reason he doesn't run again in 2024, which he still might. The idea is that an heir would be the most natural person for sort of MAGA to go, and then putting aside, I mean, that's assuming independent coordination. Putting aside the possibility that Trump just says, "Hey, this is my heir," which he would probably be more likely to do for one of his offspring than for some random congressman. So yeah, that's the idea. So I think if there is an heir to MAGA, it has to be literally another Trump. Otherwise, these are just different people fighting, and none of them has that sort of star power, that quality that just makes them stand out and makes everyone come to them and at the expense of everyone else.
Well, so we're talking about dynasties here. So I'm a population geneticist. I have like kind of a cognitive toolkit. I have some experience. I have some heuristics that I use to interpret the world. And so I like to ask you, as a political scientist, these sorts of questions, just, for the listener, just give you some context why I asked you these sorts of random questions. Because for you, they're not as random. Dynasties. Like, what do we know about political dynasties in democratic societies? Like, we have had a few, but not nearly as many as, say, India and some other countries.
Yeah, I mean, politics is one of those things where, people debate how much talent and connections matter in various things. I think that politics is one place where clearly connections matter a lot more than anywhere else. So you do, the probably the best predictor of being a president or being congressman is having a father who was. We don't have dynasties in the same way that they do in India, for example, where they just sort of go on forever. Bushes, they had there was the father and the son, and there was a grandfather too. Next generation, we'll see. But our politics seems to be a little bit too open for it to go beyond 2 to 3 generations. But you could see how it makes sense. Politics is to a great extent. It's a great extent of finding it's a coordination problem, people working together, finding a sort of a natural person to put their support behind. It's about brand names. It's about obviously the connections, knowing how to do it. So yeah, political dynasties are common in democracies, but not as much as some other places. I'd say the U.S. I don't know that much about like somewhere like France, but a sort of a more elite system where my understanding is that the French leaders are selected among an academic elite. You have so people like Le Pen, are sort of outside of that. my understanding is that in a lot of European countries, it's not as easy. They're even more or less like they're even less likely to be dynasties than the United States. But yeah, I mean, we could be. I mean, the thing about the Trump movement is it's something new. I mean, I do believe it's not just the natural culmination of sort of the Tea Party or what the right's been doing for the last 30 years. I think he's brought a lot of people into politics that weren't there before. I think the Tea Party, for example, 10 years ago was a lot of people who were already Republican activists who had conservative views, who were just sort of angry, and they were reacting to Obama, and it was something like we'd seen before. Trump is, it's some of the same people, but it's also a lot of people who seem not to have been that involved in politics before. That's why he's actually pretty good for Republican turnout. Democrats had this idea that if they just got turnout high enough, they would just sweep elections forever, and they were freaking out over Texas in the last election because the turnout was so high they could just see from the early voting. They said we have a real chance here. Well, it turned out Trump is really populist in the sense that a lot of people like him who aren't normally involved in politics. While Tea Party was just a lot of high propensity voters becoming involved, and then this sort of the same thing we've always seen with the GOP. So because Trumpism is something new, I think the dynasty model sort of makes sense for understanding it in a way that it doesn't for something else. Like if it's an ideological movement, you think there's an ideological heir. If it's just a cult of personality, then you wouldn't expect an ideological heir because there is some ideology sort of to Trump, but I don't think I think if you're thinking in ideological terms, you're sort of missing what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, that's a really good point. You know, let me ask you then. What's going on with Georgia? Because of everything that happened on the Capitol, and I want to loop back to that. I want to loop back to these people, the Viking guy, and all of this weirdness. You know, but Georgia, the Democrats won two Senate races, which is pretty shocking to me, actually. I still haven't like totally internalized it that Georgia voted for Biden, and then there's a follow up with the two Senate races. Like, have you looked into that as a political scientist? What went on? I know the mainstream narrative is that there was a depression in turnout on the margin in among the Trump people, either because Trump wasn't on the ballot or because he discouraged them from showing up because he was claiming that it was going to be fraudulent anyway. Do you have any insights on that?
Uh, I mean, yeah, I've looked at the data that probably you've looked at too. Yeah, Georgia, I mean, is an interesting case, and there was a New York Times story about Stacey Abrams actually, and actually right, there was the New York Times podcast. There was also an interview with her, and I was sort of as a political scientist, I say I was impressed with sort of her acumen. She wasn't a lot of political analysis is sort of politically correct. So what Stacey Abrams says in this interview is that people in Georgia always wanted to go after these moderate white voters or whatever white voters we can get, and the best predictor by far is race and how you vote in the South. So I'm just gonna just try to get as many black votes as possible, and we're gonna go for that. I mean, if you have this demographic that votes 90+% for you, I mean, you want to turn that out to the greatest extent possible. The black population is much higher in Georgia than it is in the American electorate as a whole. I think it's something like 30% or something like that. So this was her idea, and I don't know why it hasn't been replicated everywhere else. Like maybe like there's just other things going on in Georgia, and or maybe Stacey Abrams is just that great of a political strategist. I don't know if that's the case, but there does seem to have been a lot of increase in registrations. And then yeah, the turnout. The New York Times just has a great graphic on where turnout went up and where it went down. So it went down more, and it went down everywhere because it's a runoff. There's a drop off compared to the general election, but it went down more in white working class districts compared to African American places. And when the races are that polarized, the election almost becomes like a census, especially non college whites in the South. They're overwhelmingly Republicans. So it's completely plausible to me that Trump walking around. I mean, he went to war. I mean, this is not small. Like he went to war with the governor and the Secretary of State, who are both Republicans. He told people the election was fake. I mean, there's videos of Ronna McDaniel, the RNC chair, going down to Georgia and having your votes tell her, why should we even vote? Like, it's not going to count. And so, this is a 1-2% difference from the presidential election. It's not shocking to me, especially after what I saw Biden won, and then I saw what Trump was sort of doing after that. It wasn't shocking to me that the Democrats also um, took those two seats. So it matters. I mean, it matters. It matters. Maybe not all that much now. The median voter is Joe Manchin, rather than Susan Collins or whatever, in the Senate. But yeah, I mean, it's a lesson. Don't don't tell your voters the election is fake. Yeah, this is a clear case of Trump um, looking out for himself more than he was looking out for the party. And I think given what we saw in the November election, it wasn't really surprising that they took those Senate seats too.
Do you know Adam Elkis at George Mason? Do you know
Uh,
of him?
no, I don't.
Okay. Anyway, we've been mutual follows for 10 years, and apparently Ossoff is a big fan of his Twitter account.
Oh, you know
He
who
was
else
like,
I likes? Coleman Hughes. He follows Coleman Hughes and a couple other people that are actually interesting. So maybe we're getting maybe the intellectual dark web has a faction
"Wait,
in the Republican
are
Party,
you
Democrats.
are you saying Ossoff is a member? He is a Are you saying Eric Weinstein is controlling the Senate?"
It could be, man. It could be
Okay, I don't know if I should put this podcast out in public because like
we don't want to
if
give
people
we don't want to.
it's like
Yeah.
it,
Well, and,
check.
sometimes people will follow other people, but they'll follow like 100,000 people. Like Obama follows like 50,000 people or something. So if you're followed by Obama, it's no big deal. And I looked at Ossoff's actually the number of followers, and it's not that much. It's like a few thousand. So like every single person in that he's following, he knows a little, something about. So yeah, I mean it's interesting. It's great that he's following Coleman Hughes. I hope he has an influence on him.
Well, I mean, if you look at Ossoff's browser history, it could be that he's actually loaded the website Quillette.
What do you think? Who is more likely to have read Colette regularly? Your typical Republican congressman or your typical Democrat?
Probably a Democrat, frankly.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think.
just the moderate Democrats, um, they might. I don't. They're not even gonna hate read. It's just because the left is so far left that they secretly just read it because they always have the thing that they're angry about. So I think that that's what's going on there. So let's talk about probabilities in Georgia. So we talked about this special election and they won both. Well, Warnock is up again in 2022. What do you think are the chances that the Republicans take it back? Do you think it'll regress back to the mean?
Well, here's the thing about midterm elections. Almost always, the president's first midterm election, whoever wins the presidency, the first midterm election, they lose seats in Congress. So, and this is just such a regularity, for the last several decades, going back to like Truman and before that, maybe before Truman. I don't know if it goes back. I know it goes back to at least Truman. So you've got 75 years of like the modern era of this being a regular rule. So yeah, midterms tend to be tough for the incumbents party. The Tea Party wave was during Obama's first term. You saw that uh, during Trump's first term, his first midterm, they lost the House. George W. Bush was an exception to this, but this was only like a year after 9/11, and so he was sort of riding high off of that. But generally, yeah. So I think that yeah, I mean you get regression to the mean. I don't know what the new mean is in Georgia. Maybe the new mean is a 50-50 state.
Yeah.
It's like sort of Colorado or Virginia. They were red states and they went blue very quickly without much time as purple. Um, but give if 50-50 is the mean, and senators tend to congressmen and senators tend not to do good if they belong to the same party as the president in midterm. Yeah, I'd say probably more likely than not Republicans take it. Yeah, maybe 60%. I don't know.
Well, I mean that's a pretty good shot though for it's not we're not talking Alabama here where there was a
Oh yeah,
freak event.
yeah. Alabama and Georgia, yeah, are not the same. Alabama is yeah, Alabama's more solidly red. So yeah, yeah. The Republicans probably favored in a neutral year. Maybe it's about even, but in a midterm year with Warnock and then with Democrats in control of Congress, it's easy to be in opposition. I mean, you could see why this makes sense. Things go wrong, and then just like you just say, well, that's the president. He sort of gets all the heat for it. And so you could see why this would happen. So yeah, more likely than not, it would probably go back. I think the Senate map, I think, is relatively good for. I have to look at the Senate map for 2022. The map matters so much; it matters a lot more than it used to. Individual um, candidates and their qualities don't seem to matter as much as partisanship anymore. So, if you look at the layout of the map, you'll get a better idea than probably looking at the individual candidates. Who the Republicans nominate, I mean, Georgia too matters. I mean, they could be going at a civil war for themselves. They have the Kemp, the governor is going to be basically the target number one of the MAGA people, and who knows how that shakes out. So yeah, there'll be a lot interesting to watch.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to say it. So, I did do a podcast earlier with David Shore, the famed heterodox social democrat, uncancelable,
Yeah, much
op,
so.
op, op, and he was pretty based on the map and how it was pro Republican, but after the last couple of months and what's going on between MAGA and anti-MAGA Republicans, I wonder if that matters as much because there might be a lot more infighting on the right in the next couple of years than you would rationally have assumed. Like, what do you think of that question, that consideration?
I think there's a great possibility that MAGA just gets shut down. That the Trump just loses every megaphone he has. He's not on Twitter. He's not on Facebook. Right? I don't see them reinstating him anytime soon. I think Fox News didn't like him before he became president. I think they're sort of over him. And so you need a way to mobilize. This thing needs a way to survive. I know I was just saying he could have a dynasty. I mean, it's unpredictable. I could see it go anywhere from he disappears to he sort of continues controlling the party. But now that I think about it, I think the deplatforming is just a really really big deal. And yeah, I guess when I look at it now, I don't. That's why maybe the air is better because Don Jr. and Ivanka can at least tweet. Maybe Trump tries to tries to force them to give him his account. It gets them banned too. But they're going to actually have Twitter accounts uh, while he doesn't. It's going to be fascinating. I mean, the thing is about the Republican Party is that it used to be actually about when you get primaried, it was about issues. So the Tea Party was sort of like you spend too much, you're too big government. There was this sort of this thing of primarying people for being too friendly to immigration. This would just be, do you like Trump enough, or not? And once the platform is gone, and once the presidency is gone, I don't know how durable that'll be. I mean, he's still president. I mean, literally being the president of the United States is a huge, huge platform, and people are going to sort of be drawn to you just for that. Um, Once that's gone, I don't know. And you could just see the Republicans just sort of just sort of going back to normal, going back to what they've been. I don't know. It sort of depends on the party. Is just interesting because it's so ideologically adrift. I mean, it's not like there's these factions where some are saying, we need bigger government. I mean, there really are, but what they're fighting over is the election real? Are you going to fight for Trump? This is what's causing the split, right? And Trump goes away, maybe they'll be fighting over something else. But maybe they're not. Maybe the Trump people just sort of get discouraged and are not involved in politics for a while. I don't know. But the future of the Republican Party is sort of it's sort of hard. It's hard to guess.
Yeah, so I mean, before the unpleasantness of the 6th and even maybe in early December, I was, assuming that the Republicans would win back in 2022. Now I am very uncertain. So like, estimate probability, I'd say like 50%. Like I know what the history is, but if you lose 10 to 20% of people because of ideological faction or cult of personality, like these sorts of issues, you're gonna lose. So I mean, what do you think about that hypothesis, the
Well,
conjecture?
I mean, Trump is also a great mobilizer for the other side too. So I don't know if the resistance wine moms are as excited when it's Biden trying to pass some incremental, raising of taxes or incremental health care bill. Are those people going to be as excited as they once were? I don't know, right? So it's the Trump going away sort of cuts both ways. You could imagine you just go back to the place where the high propensity Republican voters show up, which was sort of seen as the norm 10 years ago, and the Democrats less so. I mean, one thing that was interesting in the Purdue Loeffler Georgia races is that the areas that were highly educated white swung much more towards the Republican senators. So they sort of came home with these people who did not like Trump all that much. So the sort of high propensity voters might be going back to the Republican Party. You might get a depression in the crazy people on sort of both sides, and it might be good
Mhm.
for the Republican Party. I just don't know. This is a it's easy to predict. I think that there's not going to be a civil war. I think it's harder to predict the future sort of trajectory of American politics. There's just a lot going on.
Well, I mean, I guess if I had asked you this question, because I'm not a political scientist. I'm just a simple geneticist. Uh, if you had asked me this question in the middle of November, I would have said, well, I mean, I'm pretty confident that the Republicans are going to take back in 2022 because, like, look at the results, and they did okay even with Trump as a headwind, and he's not gonna be on the ticket anymore in 2022, and I know about the midterms, blah, 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 all of these things, um, but the last month has been crazy,
Yeah,
I mean, it's been crazy, and so now I'm just, like, really uncertain of these sorts of truisms and these patterns.
yeah, I think that yeah, I mean, if someone told you 3 years ago one of the main intellectual forces in the Republican Party would be the belief that satanic pedophiles were sort of running the world and Trump was gonna save us from them, I think you would have said that was pretty crazy. And it doesn't seem like it doesn't. I think QAnon is actually going to go away too. I think they're going to go all the way of the alt right. I think the deplatforming and the censorship sort of works. You could imagine a world where Republicans sort of see Silicon Valley as doing their dirty work for them, and they'll fundraise and sort of saber rattle against them, but secretly they're happy that they're taking care of this Trump problem, taking care of the Trump problem for them. I think it was a little bit like that with 2016. A lot of people who were being banned in 2016, 2017 were sort of alt right, white nationalists, people like that. Republicans were, happy to see them go. They were trolling Ben Shapiro more than anyone else. QAnon, might find itself in a similar place, and the Republican Party could, sort of just run these generic suits who win elections just because of the backlash to wokeness. You're right that the last month has been crazy. I think if we had an election today, like with all the crazies, the Republicans would be in a little bit of trouble. But attention spans are short, and in 2 years, if just the headlines start being about something Biden failed at, if something bad happens, and Republicans just sort of smile and look nice and get ready for 2022. You never know. Things could just snap back to normal. I wouldn't. I don't. It went a couple. Yeah, for me, I went through this roller coaster too because, like you, right afterwards, I thought that the Republicans were actually in good shape. Just as long as it's not Trump, they're going to be okay. Because there's just this backlash to wokeness, and this was a terrible situation for Republicans, just because Trump has never been that popular. Biden was the most moderate candidate, I think, and then the coronavirus. I think a lot of things just sort of lined up for them pretty well. And they barely won, right? They barely squeaked it out. So I said, "Oh, Republicans have a decent future." And then the infighting came. I'm like, "Oh my God, Trump is going to be just a thorn in their side for the next few years, like stopping them from being normal." And then Trump got deplatformed, and I'm like, "Wait a minute, this might work out for Mitch McConnell after after all." That problem might be solved for them. So we'll see. If you change your mind on something like that, three times in 2 months, I wouldn't hazard too much predictions about what's going to happen 2 or 4 years down the line.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I just wanna be concrete in that it seemed like a return to normalcy in a way was feasible in November, but,
Oh, I think it's more feasible. I think Trump is uniquely important. I just think that he's just such a singular figure, and I think if he just goes away, I mean, I think the odds of going back to normality are much. I'm not one of these people who believes in deeper forces. I mean, they exist, but often it's just a really unique politician is there and he's doing some stuff, and if he's gone, the craziness that's sort of associated with him goes with him.
okay, so, the craziness that goes with it, is associated with him, goes with him. So, a lot of the people, like, some of the people who rushed the Capitol were normal upper middle class retiree types, which is pretty bizarre. But
Yeah.
then you had, like, the Viking guy, you had the guy, the son of the judge in New York, you had Baked Alaska. you had a lot of random weirdos. So do these weirdos just kind of disappear, or are they here to stay?
Yeah, I mean, people, it's like different parts of the population become mobilized at different times in history, depending on sort of, so there was a lot of people who were, maybe a sort of white nationalists or inclined in that direction, who, when they saw Trump in 2016, it really galvanized them because there was somebody saying some stuff that was, foregrounding the immigration issue, talking about stuff they cared about. And Antifa, where were they, 5 years ago? They were, they were probably just broke college students. They were doing Occupy, they were doing Occupy Wall Street before that. Ross Perot brought out a lot of voters that just some people just didn't like either party, and this guy sort of talked like a businessman. He was sort of a proto Trump, and those people were low propensity voters that happened to turn out for Ross Perot. So you have these different points in history, and so Viking Man was Viking Man. He had his genetics, he had his genetic qualities, and his unique personality as an individual, and these other people did. And if you transport him into 1996 presidential election, and it's Bill Clinton and Bob Dole, and the joke in popular culture was there's no difference between these two. They're just two white guys in a suit, right? Viking Man doesn't care about politics. He gets into whatever, video games, extreme sports. I don't know what Viking Man, does in his free time, right? But he just stops caring about politics because there's not somebody who really speaks to him in that way. So you can imagine, yeah, they go away. I mean, that's it could be as simple as that. They're still living their lives, but they're not mobilized. They don't feel like they're not energized. They don't feel like there's a movement that's theirs. And things sort of go back to normal politics. I don't know.
Well, so Trump mobilized a lot of these kind of, I don't want to say young losers, but
Well, I mean,
young
yeah,
male losers, right? There's a certain group of young guys drinking cheap beer, marginally employed, and these aren't most of the, because the average Trump voter is just the average Republican, but there's these people on the margin, and they get a lot of
yeah.
airtime and newspaper
Yeah, but
coverage
it
because there's
doesn't have
no.
to be that. They don't have to be marginally employed. I don't know if that's a great predictor. They could be very successful, whatever. They could be successful entrepreneurs, small business owners. I mean, I don't know necessarily they have to be margin. So maybe some are marginally employed, and they see Trump as someone there for them. But I think it's more of sort of a psychological trait thing. Not very intellectual. You don't like wokeness, and you have nothing in common with these Republicans who are just suits who talk about tax cuts and small government. And if that's the choice, you just don't care about politics. You don't get excited about it. And you're given a guy like Trump who's just like a businessman and telling you, satanic pedophiles around the world. Conspiracy theorists are the most underrepresented people in Congress and among elites. So just like a guy who's sort of friendly to conspiracy theories, every conspiracy nut subculture likes him, from 9/11 truthers to anti vaxxers, to just COVID denialist, to QAnon, right? So the fact that this guy is sort of it signals he's open to that. He's sort of the same kind of guy as you, and he's sort of this he's got this sort of macho personality, and he doesn't care about really ideas. He just sort of wants to win and attack elites, and that appeals to a certain person. You don't always have that choice, right? You always have, like, you're only given a menu of a few options at any one time, right? In national politics, and some people will pay attention to nothing below the presidency. So, like in the primaries, you have a few candidates serious candidates on each side. Then you have the presidential election, and there could be times when there's just nobody who speaks to the people who were storming the Capitol. That's possible, right? He goes away, and maybe they stay as Republicans. Maybe they get into it. I think a lot of those people sort of love the entertainment value, and I think without Trump, it just sort of gets boring. You can listen to James Jordan and Matt Gaetz talking about Hunter Biden's emails. It's just not as fun as Trump calling Rosie O'Donnell a fat pig, right? I mean, people's tastes vary a lot, and to say this is like it sounds a little bit insulting or condescending, but a lot of people like trashy reality TV. A lot of people like Jerry Springer. A lot of people are drawn to this stuff. I don't think we can deny this.
Well, I mean, so, when Andrew Jackson, who Trump is ostensibly a fan of, came to the United States, he came to the White House, came to DC, became president, he transformed the presidency and also, just the political alliances, whatever. The age of jacks is a big deal. But talking to you, it sounds like you're saying Trump could be a flash in the pan. We heard after the election about a realignment, working class Republican versus professional managerial class Democrats, perhaps some erosion among young Latinos, especially men, Latinx men, moving into the Republican camp. But do you think that that's all just kind of noise and that'll just like fade as Trump fades?
Yeah, so I mean, I have a report with George Howley at CSPIcenter.org. You could see we call it the national populist illusion. And it's a very data heavy sort of dive into this idea that Republicans became the working class party. Trump was good for Republican turnout, good for Democrat turnout too, I'm sure. But if you look at the demographics, who voted for Trump, it's it's pretty much the same people. I mean, it's the same people who voted before. So it's the percentage of Republicans, the percentage of white men. There was a big shift from college educated whites going away from the Republican Party and non college whites going towards the Republican Party. So Republicans sort of switched college whites for non college whites. But income has always been a poor predictor of how people vote, and it didn't become a better predictor when Trump came along. One thing David Short talked about is the places that actually have succeeded from globalization, places in Iowa, for example, where they sell soybeans to China, or places where they have a industry that's exporting a lot of things to different parts of the country. And those people, if they are college non-educated, if they're non-college educated in their white areas, they still shifted to Trump just as much as globalization's losers, right? It's not about some people are winning from globalization and some people are losing from globalization. This is too a materialist view of politics. It's a class thing where the college. Well, Trump was speaking to a certain kind of person, and he was repelling another kind of person. And beneath the surface, most didn't change in how people voted. If you gave the predictors of voting Republican, if you were a married white man, who was 45 with 3 children and went to church every weekend, you were overwhelmingly a Trump supporter. And if you were a single Latina living in Los Angeles, whatever, you were likely to be a Democrat voter. The other thing you mentioned, I think, is interesting, is the Hispanic and Asian, and to a lesser extent Black shift towards Trump. I think it's real. It's certainly real. Some of those shifts were huge, but the shifts were compared to 2016, where Trump's numbers with immigrant communities just had plummeted. So they had done worse than. So it was sort of a regression to the mean, actually, where the Hispanic vote for Trump was worse than Hispanic votes for other Republicans. George W. Bush, probably did better with Hispanics in 2004 than Trump did in 2020. Trump just massively overperformed with Hispanics, particularly Cubans. I think there's some foreign policy stuff going on with Cubans and maybe Venezuelans and some of these other groups. But it was more of a regression to the mean, and a big jump from 2016 than it was a realignment. The Asian Hispanic vote about 30-40% Republican, 40% as the high end, maybe gets down to mid 20s in Trump 2016, when he really repulsed immigrant communities. And I think it's actually the reason he did better in 2020. I think it goes against sort of working class the working class party narrative. I think he just stopped talking about immigration. I think in 2016 he ran on immigration as his main issue. They tested the theory that you can have a multiracial working class coalition by just talking about immigration, and he plummeted. It was a very racially polarized election. Now on immigration, the policy has been a little bit more restrictionist. He's done a few things, but I've looked at if he talks about immigration, and he never talked about immigration at all during the 2020 campaign. And I think it's just sort of a regression. I mean, that it was immigration was sort of the main issue. This turned off a lot of voters, and then when it wasn't that big of an issue in 2020, they sort of came back to Trump. So yeah, I don't think Trump has shaken. Yeah, that's another thing that a lot of things people say are sort of are not backed up by the data. I think if there's a theme to this conversation, it's that.
Yeah, and I will link in the show notes to your report. Uh, Actually, I want to ask you about the Democrats, because we've been talking about Trump and the Republicans. I want to ask you about the Democrats, but I want to talk about this new nonprofit that you started, which has been putting out reports. They're really great, really interesting. You were on the realignment, and you just were talking about your stuff about cultural issues and how you basically rocked Sagar and Jetty's whole worldview. So
Yeah,
you
that
made a
was
difference. You made a difference. But can you talk about your nonprofit, and also what do you think about? So you have like Eric Kaufman, and I don't know Holly too well, but you have Goldberg, Zach Goldberg. It's a pretty based lineup. What do you think about? What do you think about Conquest's law and what might happen if you guys actually succeed?
So I should mention also, yeah, you mentioned George, you mentioned Eric, Zach, Susie Molesky is also with us. She's a grad student at USC. She's also great. Does a lot of stuff on NGOs and sort of virtue signaling, and then how they have from an evidence based perspective, a lot of what they do doesn't work. So I gotta mention her too. So Conquest's law, is that the one where the is that the one where you become left wing if you're not explicitly right wing? Is that it?
Yes, yes. And so because you guys are nonpartisan.
Um, yeah, I mean, look, this it was started with the idea that it started the idea that it's sort of opposition to the mainstream of academia and what it's doing. We draw on academia too, so it's sort of from within academia in the sense that some of us are academics, and we use a lot of tools in academia that the in the literature that we think are valuable and provide a lens through which to understand the world. But we don't like, we're sort of we're 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 hesitant, or we're trying to overcome the problem of political bias and sort of just the inaccessibility of a lot of the good work that's been done. So, for example, the Washington Post op-ed on Civil War was just bringing in research on Civil War into the American context, and the discussions I saw in the newspapers and on TV are sort of been evidence free. So yeah, I think it's personnel as policy. I mean, I think we've got a lot of great people. I think a lot of our people have made a name for themselves, not necessarily being conservative, but have just built a lot of intellectual capital as just being good academics, as people who do rigorous database work. Zach is it's egalitarian in the sense that you can go to the public and you can jump the line even though you are a sort of a junior person in academia. So Zach, for example, is a graduate student right now. He's still a PhD student, and he discovered the Great Awakening. And Iglesias wrote about it in Vox. Iglesias actually, I think, might have came up with the term Great Awakening.
Yeah,
Uh,
he came up with the term, but
Zach,
Zach came up with the data and the result.
yeah, exactly. So I think the Great Awakening, if you listed maybe the 5, 10 most important.
Actually, Richard,
Yeah.
back up. Quickly tell the listener what the Great Awakening is.
Yeah, so I'll just finish. So Zach, I mean, I would say it's one of the most important ideas that sort of smart people have adopted in the last 10 years. That regarding sort of where our culture has gone, it's become sort of conventional wisdom now. And the Great Awakening is the idea that basically there was a radical shift to the left. Among mainstream liberal institutions, name the Democratic Party, but mainly the press. I shouldn't call them a democratic institution, but just say like mainstream liberal institutions towards far left views on race, gender, sexual orientation. So if you go back to the New York Times, and it's backed up in data among white Democrats too, right? So it's sort of a top-down phenomenon where you started at the elite level. So if you go back to the New York Times and you look at the words that they use, the Washington Post, the other major papers, you see a huge takeoff around 2010, 2011 in words like systematic racism, right? And like the words, phrases like white privilege, LGBTQ. I don't know about that one specifically, actually, but just ideas like this, anything having to do with that, sexism, patriarchy, stuff like that. And you can look at the graphs; they're actually beautiful. It just takes off. And then you look at you look at opinion among white Democrats, and it moves on these issues. So 12 years ago, um, a lot of white Democrats were anti-immigration. They wanted less immigration. Obama, I'm reading Obama's memoirs, and it's fascinating how much of his time and mental energy was spent on walking on eggshells on these racial issues, because there was the idea if you went just a little bit sort of outside the mainstream, there would be this huge backlash even among Republican Democrats. It'd be widespread among American society. Well, Republicans haven't changed that much on these issues in the last 10 years, but Democrats have, and so now it's more evenly divided on a question like reparations can be even discussed seriously or advocated by presidential candidates. That would have been unthinkable even in the Democratic primary 5 or 10 years ago. Somebody actually did a study of how often in the Democratic debates, just 2016 versus 2020, they mentioned words like black and white and this and that, and it just goes through the roof. In just the last 4 years. So the Democratic Party is sort of a lagging indicator. People blame the Democrats, and they sort of direct their energy at sort of Democratic politicians. I think that's a little bit of a mistake. I think it's a lagging indicator. I think the first thing that happened, and Zach has demonstrated this in an article he wrote in Tablet, sort of laid down the chronology, in that it starts in the New York Times. It's just literally the New York Times. I mean, it's that. I mean, it probably starts in academia. I mean, these ideas were there first, and so it's this top down. So it's the New York Times. It's the other prestige media, and then it's Democratic politicians, and along with the politicians, I mean, the Democratic voter. Democratic white Democrats, and then with that you see sort of the Democratic Party going woke, and I think that was lagging. That was Obama didn't even support gay marriage, I think, until well, gay marriage I think is a little bit different. So like around 2011, this was when the Great Awakening was taking off, and then you see like nobody in 2011 or 2012 was talking about, well, Obama, his second term, right? So 20, yeah. So I think I'm right. So either
Yeah.
2013 or 2014, he started supporting gay marriage. So this was like 5 years after the Great Awakening started, and even then, nobody was talking about whiteness. To say whiteness would have been very strange for a politician in our.
Yeah.
So there's sort of a lagging indicator, and it was Zach who just with data and just clearly you sort of the graphs are not ambiguous. You look at them, it's just a straight line going up around 2010 and 2011, and I think people are understanding there was something revolutionary happening, and sort of what's been happening with sort of the George Floyd protests and these other things you've seen. Corporations go woke. I think that's another just lagging indicator that people sort of mistake for causing all of this when it really didn't.
Well, so, we were talking about Schelling points earlier, and I think the George Floyd incident, his death, his killing, I mean, that was a Schelling point, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that a lot of these, even like the more ambiguous cases would cause a lot of unrest in the inner cities. I think the video of this one was just so terrible um, that it really just hit people in a different way. Whether it's actually an indication of greater problems with policing, that depends on your politics. Well, your politics determines what you think about that. But yeah, I think that's right. I think these issues, these concerns about race, are always out there, and it sort of needs an event for there to be a spark.
Well, so, we talked about the Republicans a lot and how they were, maybe the Trump era is going to be an aberration. I mean, we'll see, but that's what I'm getting from you as your modal probability, your modal, if you had to put money on it, and you do bet on the markets, so you probably would put money on it, right?
Yeah, there's no, there's markets on whether Trump's going to be impeached or not. I went no, or not. I mean, convicted, impeached. He's obviously going to be impeached probably by the time your listeners listen to this. But yeah, I think modal is he goes away just because I think the platform is really important. I mean, this happened. These people like Milo and Gavin McInnes were huge in 2016, 2017. They were causing riots at Berkeley, and they're just not there anymore. I mean, it's sort of a cope to say censorship is going to cause this backlash. Like, no, then like every dictator in history who censored his opponents has been making a mistake. I doubt that. It usually just works, and I think that people were saying Trump was going to get banned from Twitter on January 20th anyway, just because he probably violates the rules a lot. But now he's probably just going to be completely deplatformed, and I think the modal probability is yeah, he probably just goes away because even he has that connection with Republican voters. He just doesn't have a way to speak to them directly. Maybe he speak the real the really excited people. They go on Gab, or they or they go on Telegram, or wherever Trump goes. He's going to have legal problems too. I mean, that's the thing too, is civil lawsuits, potentially criminal lawsuits. I think his probability of getting prosecuted has gone up. Probably not for this specific event. It's very hard, First Amendment incitement for political speech, and he didn't actually say go walk in there and break down the walls and go kill people. He didn't say anything like that. So that's really really hard to win on First Amendment grounds. I would be shocked if they even tried it. But he's got other things like potentially tax fraud. Potentially obstruction of justice from earlier things. And I think just he's sort of angered the establishment in a way that with there's always prosecutorial discretion. I think he's increased the possibility that he'll be got for something. So yeah, I thought Trump would be around forever. The social media is just so huge, and it's not just Twitter. It's the fact that it came in such a way where like Instagram and Pinterest and everything else in the world just banned him. I don't see how somebody maintains his sort of his place in American culture with that.
Yeah, I mean, and he's not the youngest guy. So let me ask you about the Democrats. You know, in conservative circles, I know there's an argument, there's a debate, and when I mean conservative circles, I'm on private signal groups and stuff like that, and there's arguments about whether Biden will usher in kind of a return to normalcy or a kind of, I mean, it's an exaggeration to call it a woke terror, but basically the cultural war that the woke have been waging against cultural conservatives, social conservatives on most issues, not all, but on most issues. Uh, and will it accelerate? Will it intensify? Like, what is your judgment? Because obviously Biden's profile is a moderate Democrat, but Personalis policy and the people that work for Biden um, are probably way to his left culturally.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I wonder what people sort of mean with by woke reign of terror. I mean, they're going to come down hard on QAnon, Proud Boys. Look, I mean, when you make Congress fear for their lives and you embarrass the government in that way, there's going to be repercussions. But I think people sort of see this as a sort of a more long term, a more long term thing. I mean, I think I'm not as alarmist as a lot of people. I mean, what levers does the federal government have? Well, they have civil rights law, disparate impact. I think that yeah, I think that if you look at the great sort of purges from social media, they've usually come in waves, and it's not like a gradual. It is in a way. The culture is sort of a gradual turning up of the temperature, but it's usually waves when something happens. So after Trump won the election, I think there was a big purge on social media. After Charlottesville, I think it became more extreme. It became stuff like banks refusing to do business with people, right? Not just banning their Twitter accounts. And then I think it sort of leveled off for a while. I did not feel like the censorship was, from the top down. I mean, there's stuff going on with the culture and stuff that the government doesn't directly control. But I thought there was a leveling off until the Capitol Hill, until the storming of Capitol Hill. So look, Biden's gonna come into office. They might reinstate the Title IX, the kangaroo courts for men accused of sexual assault in college campuses, or maybe if Ossoff is reading Colette, maybe he exerts an influence on Biden and they don't. And especially on the race stuff, I think we're going to see more sort of. We're going to see more liberal use of civil rights law, disparate impact, taking businesses to court for being discriminatory and more sort of less cases where it's less obvious that that's actually what's going on. But yeah, I mean, beyond that, yeah, I think I'm on the side of more normal. I don't see I don't see anything that's going to be too radical of a break from the past.
Well, I mean, you, sir, are the opposite of if it bleeds, it leads, because I'm proposing these scenarios, and you're just saying, it's gonna be back to normal, right?
Well, there was this incredible New York Times article the other day where they talked about Sean Hannity's show, and then in the headline was something like Fox News prepares for a post-Trump world, and it was saying Hannity's show Friday night was about the Clintons, the Obamas, Madonna, and Kathy Griffin. Right? They said and they had this funny line. It could have been a rerun from 2014. Right? And then Hannity, it was also online, and he was tweeting, it's like, why am I paying attention to this stupid person Hannity? Because he's like important, and he's more important than most of the people your listeners listen to, as far as guiding our politics. And there was another, we talked about, oh, another caravan is coming, due to the Biden administration. It's just a rerun, right? It's an eternal loop. They're calling, it seems exciting on its surface, but you look at it and it's sort of just like the same outrages and the same debates over and over again. What's Biden going to do? He's probably going to try to raise taxes, right? He's probably going to try to get more stimulus funding. He's going to probably try to incrementally increase healthcare, increase healthcare coverage. He's probably going to do stuff on immigration. This was the Obama sort of agenda, but just a little more left than it was. Even if you look at like the woke demands, like when they're protesting, their colleges and demanding the president step down, and you look at their actual demands, it's like hire more diversity counselors, have more training for staff. It's like this is the least ambitious revolutionary movement in human in human history, right? And so on the left, you have these sort of symbolic concerns. On the right, you have these these symbolic concerns too, and the left is the right is sort of reacting to the left. The left is actually moving things forward, where it was gay marriage 10-15 years ago, and now it's whether we accept trans women into women's sports. And then Republicans are sort of reacting every step of the way. They don't talk about gay marriage anymore. They're afraid, they would be afraid to, but then they talk about women's sports, right? But it's none of these things are going to break society or cause blood in the streets or civil war. And I love the entertainment value of it. I guess I shouldn't look down on those people I talked about earlier who just sort of like the sort of reality show aspect of it, because I sort of like that too. And you could tell from my Twitter account that I get a kick out of it. But I'm trying to not pay so much attention to it. Trump made it hard after Capitol Hill. There's just so many videos and so much so many takes on Twitter. But I would like to pay less attention to the daily, everyday politics of this stuff, and sort of pay attention to more important things like the general trajectory of American society, the rise in China, what's happening to family, what's happening to the culture more generally. I just don't think I think the day to day politics is sort of a distraction.
Well, I'm gonna let you go and close out. Except I want to say that I have been doing something while you've been talking. I have been paging down through John Ossoff's who he follows, and I have
Yeah,
been looking at overlaps, and he does follow about 1,000 people, so it's
yeah,
feasible. So
right. It's not.
I'm gonna tell the listener about Ossoff here.
We don't
He
want to get it.
follows.
Yeah, go ahead.
Uh, well, I mean, maybe, I mean, depends on, I mean, I do know some prominent people, including, well, I'm not gonna say who subscribes because I don't want to convict the innocent, but, um, Wes Yang,
Right, right.
Th
Yeah.
Thomas Chatterton Williams, Camille Foster,
Okay. I don't know Camille Foster. I know the other famous. Yeah.
he's Matt Taibbi,
Okay.
David Shore,
Okay.
Coleman,
Yeah.
Zaid Jalani.
Okay. Yeah. My one of my followers.
Yeah, I mean, Zaid's been on my podcast, one of my podcasts before. We're buds, but Boomy Leaks, who is kind of an edgy centrist account that I do follow and have followed for many years, and
Uh,
Boomy Leaks consistently gets banned for being satirical and has had to kind of tread that line. But basically, they're definitely IDW adjacent. Um, and so Li Feng.
yeah. Yeah. Li Fong. That's the leftist who's intercept, who's also tough on crime and sometimes
And
gets
he
in
was
trouble
can
for
he there was a cancel he was a he was there was a cancellation attempt on him.
He goes by
Um,
he him. By the way, I'm looking at his account too now. He him is a that's a sort of an interesting spin given the followers.
yeah, I mean, I so Lee and I follow each other actually. So, we've
I'm not talking
DM'd.
about, no, not Lee Ossoff is he him. I don't know about
Oh,
Lee.
okay, wait, he's a politician, he has to now
No, no,
with
I
his
I did a data analysis in the Democratic primary, and, like, it was like half and half, actually. It was the ones, and actually, I made a joke that the ones were doing better, the ones who didn't do he, him, because it was Biden and Sanders were the non-woke, and then Klobuchar, and then, like, the ones weren't doing so well was, like, Buttigieg, Harris, Warren. They all had their pronouns, and they didn't do as well. So I had this, like, graph with, like, ten observations, which I thought was funny, but yeah, that's awesome. That's actually pretty
there
cool.
there's one more, there's one more. JD Vance.
Okay.
So I mean, these are people that are mutual in terms of like I follow. These are people that I follow, and so
Yeah.
there could be other gems in there.
Yeah.
So anyone who is listening and wants to do, because I mean, BuzzFeed has done
No,
stories.
I sort of don't like what we're doing. We are maybe setting this guy up for some kind of cancellation or renouncing of based on this. I don't know.
No, but he's gonna be in the Senate for 6 years.
So we're just breaking a story that's going to get broken anyway. You think?
Yeah, I mean, whatever. I don't think it's a story that's getting broken. Maybe it's okay. That
Yeah.
he is that he. I mean, IDW needs representation too.
I mean, it's fat. The split, yeah, the split. These people who some see Trump as the answer to wokeness, and some see him as just sort of this independent cancer to wokeness, or sort of feeding into wokeness. That split is fascinating, and sort of the IDW. Its influence is also interesting because I think if you look at mutuals and sort of Twitter networks, I haven't seen the actual analysis, but just guessing from what I've seen on Twitter, I think there's more overlap between right wing people and the IDW than there is with the IDW and the left. And if you look at Colette's comment section, it could be Federalist. It could be
Yeah.
something like that often. Um,
Yes.
but then if you look at the politician level, I can't imagine. Like these Republican, senators or these Republican congressmen like Paul Gosar, I can't imagine them, reading Colette. I can imagine the moderate Democrats more too. So sort of, their base, there is there is a market for, and this is a little bit what CSBI is doing. There's a market for smarter conservatism. I'm sorry, but a lot of the stuff out there, and Trump has unfortunately exacerbated this trend, is just not very smart, right? And you would hope that the people, these smarter people like Coleman, like Wesley Yang, are influencing actual politicians. It's happening among Republicans, and conservative people generally. But at the top levels, it's sort of just this intellectual wasteland. It's sort of these con artists and these barking talk radio hosts and these Fox News anchors, and it's just terrible. So if you dislike wokeness, and you're tempted to go in the Trumpist direction, but you also you don't like the left, I'd encourage thinking about how you're thinking intelligently about sort of where the opportunity lies and who you can realistically influence.
Yeah. Yeah. Last question. So you're talking about intelligent conservatives. Do you have an opinion on Ben Shapiro?
um Not particularly, no. I mean, he's
Okay.
I mean, he's a typical conservative in his views, right? I don't think I have anything to say that would surprise people.
Okay. Okay. I
Oh,
was just asking because my hypothesis is he's obviously extremely bright, but
yeah.
he knows what he has to do and be and the way he has to speak to have a lucrative career.
Yeah. I mean, Shapiro, yeah, is unquestionably a smart guy. I think he went to Harvard. Did he go to Harvard Law School or Harvard undergrad?
Yeah,
So
yeah, maybe UCLA undergrad and Harvard Law. It was some combination like that.
yeah, and that's pretty smart. Yeah, and I don't think he's just a some people I don't think he's just like a pure grifter like a lot of these people are either. He seems to believe what he says. He's a religious guy. He's got, I think, a wife, and I think he's got a good number of children. Yeah, I really have nothing to say about Ben Shapiro. No, no, I can't get excited one way or the other. Yeah, he's just sort of there. He's a typical conservative. I think he's gone in the. I mean, I'll say we talked about the IDW and sort of these intersections between different political factions. I think it's interesting that he was friends with Sam Harris, and he was sort of seen in this club. I think it's whatever you think of Shapiro, we need more of that. We need sort of this cross party talking, and Glenn Beck is actually going to be on Eric Weinstein. I saw on Twitter today, and that'll be interesting. I think Glenn Beck, is a little bit more on the in the clown, is sort of more in the clown camp, as far as
I
faction.
I I think he was literally a part-time rodeo clown at some point.
Let's see. Yeah, so he's a little bit of a clown. Actually, he's not completely without integrity because he went against Trump and in 2016, and that was not. I can't imagine that was a good business decision. Now he eventually came around to Trump and started to love him, but the fact that it took him like 5 years of suffering, his business suffering, and to actually sell out is probably he probably had more sort of integrity there than most people did. So I think I
Yeah.
think I think a lot of these people believe. Um, almost everybody believes to a certain extent. What they tell themselves, and when they make compromises in the short term, they think it's towards some greater good, right? They convince themselves there's going to be some kind of woke reign of terror, so Trump is the only thing holding it back. I don't buy that, but even if you see Trump as a horrible person, you could still you could see how somebody would justify supporting him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's we live in interesting times. You are predicting a little bit more boredom, and that's probably a good thing. So I've had you for a while. I will let you go, and everyone should check out your new nonprofit. I will put the links and everything like that. There's really good stuff there already, and maybe we'll follow up at some point, Richard. And you know, Richard, if there is a civil war that breaks out, I am gonna get you on for a follow up.
You could have Peter Turchin you can have just Peter Turchin laughing at the background and everything I
Yeah, I'll put a crayon drawing that shows an exponential increase in violence as a cover for the podcast.
Peter Turchin, here you fool, here is your that's what I've been trying to tell you.
Okay, take it easy, man.
All right, thanks, Razim.
This podcast for kids.